now. Welcome everyone to the Deploying Your Web App on Heroku workshop. We're going to go through a few things today. I'll keep it as brief as I can. We're going to first talk on deployment, what that even is, why it's important, especially towards the end of the semester. Then we'll touch on what Heroku is, how to create a free Heroku account, how to make the very small configuration changes to make your application work on Heroku, and then how to deploy your app on Heroku and manage it, all from the website. I have the workshop text channel open on another screen, so feel free to either unmute, interrupt me with questions at any time, or drop questions in that text channel. I will see them immediately, and I'll answer them as soon as I can. And these slides are available at this public link, and you can see that in the text channel now, or if you're watching the recording of this in the future, it'll be in the video description. This is being recorded and will be posted pretty much within an hour after. Keep an eye on the Discord for the link to that. Another cool thing, this presentation is open source itself. It's written in plain HTML using a very cool framework called reveal.js. And here's an example. Here's the code for the previous slide that you just saw, excluding the image. Pretty cool. So if you want to do cool slides and not have to worry about Google Slides and you really need the collaboration parts and stuff, check out reveal.js. You can find the source code for this workshop, these slides, and all my workshops. I think maybe only 2 are on right now, but at the repository apexel/RCOS workshops. So we'll get into it. What is deployment? For web apps in particular, which we're going to be focusing on, as in websites, it's the process of installing, configuring, enabling app, blah, 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 blah. Basically, it's going from localhost to a public URL that you can share with other people, right? When you start working on your projects, they're running on your own computers. You can access them via localhost, whatever port. When you actually want to test the website or deploy it to the wider world, you need to set up a lot of things. You need a server that's always running. You need to purchase a domain name. You need to configure everything properly. You have to worry about HTTPS for HTTP, all that sort of stuff. So what is Heroku? Where does Heroku come into play? From their site, they claim to be a cloud platform that lets companies or individuals build, deliver, monitor, and scale apps. Most importantly, they claim they're the fastest way to go from an idea to URL. So if we check out Heroku.com, and feel free to do this as I go, it's a website, a portal, where you can give it your apps and it handles all the heavy lifting of deploying them in the cloud and giving you a link to them. Pretty darn cool. So instead of attempting to deploy a web app manually, which could cost money, costs obviously a lot of time, potential headaches, a lot of confusion, you gotta learn a lot of things, you just use Heroku and hand off the code, and they handle all the hard parts. And I don't think I included it in the slides here, but they have very, very, very generous free tiers for their services, which I'll use in a second. So if you're interested in following along, you can make a free Heroku account at signup.heroku.com. And no, I'm not sponsored by Heroku. Not yet, at least. That would be nice. Or of course, you could just watch. So that's kind of what Heroku is, right? And now for the rest of this, we're just going to see the process of using Heroku in action. This is the example web server we're going to use. It uses the Flask Python framework, or micro framework, I guess. If you know Python, you might be familiar with Flask. If you're not, check it out, because look how easy it is to make a whole web server. It's really this simple. Pretty cool. Here we see it's going to have one page at the index route, and all it's going to do is return a paragraph that says, "Hello, RCOS." The easiest way to work with Heroku is to have your projects in Git repositories hosted on GitHub, which you probably all do from being in RCOS this semester. Now, if you want to experiment with trying to deploy what I'm going to do today, I have this extremely simple app that you just saw at apexel/sample app. You could fork it. You don't even need to clone it to your own computer, in fact, as we'll see in a moment. This is what we're working with. It really is this simple, this file. So our goal again is, right, I can run this on my own computer, type in the console flask run, and I'll get a localhost 3030, open it, and I see it. Great. But if I want, coolwebsite.com, how do I get to that? Well, just a few steps in terms of what Heroku needs to know about your web app before it can do everything for you. Number one is it needs to know what programming language it's written in. Heroku is smart and can automatically tell. Once you point to the code, it goes, oh, this is going to be Python. It also needs to know what third-party packages the application depends on. So if we look back at mine, this depends on Flask. Pretty common. This web app only has one, but in typical web apps, you might have way too many. And last but not least, we need to tell Heroku how to actually, once you've downloaded the code and downloaded all the dependencies that we've said we've needed, how do we actually start the web app? It can't automatically tell. Sometimes it can, usually it can't, because there might be a variety of ways you want to start the web app. So we're just going to go through these real quick. How do we tell Heroku what dependencies are used? We can just create a requirements.txt file for Python projects. The great thing about Heroku is there's very, very minimal vendor lock-in the sense of you don't have to make fast changes to your code to have it work with Heroku, right? And then if you switch from Heroku, you have to get rid of all that code. Heroku looks for the standard files for each different web stack. If you're running a Python project, it's going to look for the conventional requirements.txt file, which is just a text file where each line is a different package, like Flask. If this was a Node project, which Heroku also supports, it would look for the package.json, right? And it would look for the dependencies there. However, I tend to use tools that handle Python dependencies a little nicer, because one of the main problems with Python, as great a language as it is that dependency management and packaging and versioning and all that is an absolute disaster, and actually pushes people to leave the language because it's that bad. So right here, I suggest the tool pipenv, which if you look up, lets you just generate a pip file. It looks very similar to like a package JSON, and a lock file. This is like an industry standard for Python projects, and it is also a dead project as far as I can tell. But it's still standard, so it's very weird. I still recommend if you have a Python web app, you want to deploy it on Heroku, use pipenv. I see a message being typed or a comment, so I'll keep an eye on it as it goes. But if you're doing a Node website or anything, or the variety of other languages that Heroku supports, there's probably a simpler way. There's probably a single standard way. Yep, and I see Prasant said requirements.txt. Yes, that's also very common. Now the start command is just as easy to declare. We create a text file named procfile and entering the following: web, and then a command. So check out what I did. Procfile here, web here. Where did I get this? Well, I Googled back in the day when I was learning how to run Flask apps in production to use Gunicorn. And we can see here in my pip file, The two packages it depends on are Flask and Gunicorn. So Heroku will look at this code. It will say, okay, it is a Python project. Next, it will look for dependencies and go, oh, a pip file. Look at those dependencies and install them. Finally, it will look for the proc file, see this command, and run that. So I'm going to do this now. I'm going to create a new app. You can see I use this for a variety of things. A lot of the RCOS infrastructure things used to run in Heroku, still kind of do. If you entered the server back when you had to connect to your CAS account, you might have noticed that the URL was like arcosdiscord.herokuapp.com. So we're going to create a new app. I'm going to call it sample app. I believe these names are global, so we'll have to do something like sample app Frank RCOS, or probably just Frank. And that's pretty straightforward. And this becomes a dashboard where you can control your whole application. Pretty darn cool. So what you could do is connect GitHub and tell Heroku to look for a particular repository. Whoops. Little misclick. So remember, I named this repository sample app. I can connect it here. Great. Now here's one of the great things about Heroku. Number one, what I just did was free. And number two, there are many, many things you can do here also while remaining in the free tier. In fact, you could have a free Postgres database, for an example. If we look at add-ons really quick, I heavily encourage you to check these out. Many of these have free platforms. Free Redis servers, free logging things, Kafka, all these sorts of things that I don't know what they are or what they mean, but are usually free to use, or at least free to try to use, and very, very, very easily integrated with Heroku. So Prasant asked, do you know how much the free tier can handle? And we'll see that in a second. It's a little clever how it handles the free tier. So, okay, I pointed this Heroku app to the GitHub repository. Here's one cool feature now. Typically, when I want to deploy an application, that would be a manual process maybe. On Heroku, you can set it to automatically deploy every time a particular branch on the GitHub repository is pushed to. So I could enable that for master. So potentially if you have an RCOS project, you have a master branch or a production branch that you make pull requests on and eventually merge to, you can set that to Heroku so that it automatically redeploys your web app every time you push to that branch. You wouldn't want to do this on the dev branch necessarily, unless you want to deploy your dev branch every time it's pushed to. But this would be more useful for branches that don't get pushed to regularly, and when they do get pushed to, it's stuff that you want in production. I'm going to manually deploy the master branch. And we can see here in the build log, might be a little hard to see, so I'll zoom in, all the stuff that's going on. Determining which build pack. It's determining which stack this project is. Python app detected. Found Python version in pip file lock. Did not find a requirements text file. It's installing Python. It's installing pip, which is for dependencies. It's installing the dependencies listed in the pip file. It's compressing everything. Altogether, it's 64 megabytes. It's launching. It's released. Deployed to Heroku. Now, I've tried this a few times. Let's see if this actually... We'll have to wait for a second. There we go. We can see here I can view the logs, which are separate from the build logs, right? The logs are just kind of the runtime logs when your project's running. This is where you'd see anything that you print out or console log, any of that, as well as errors. And we can see build succeeded, and now I have a URL. So now all of you can go to this URL, sampleappfrank.herokuapp.com. And notice I didn't pay for anything. And the way it gets away with this is, give me 1 second. I'm gonna log back into my Discord screen. Great. With the free tier on Heroku, it will run your app with, very, very minimal server and CPU specs, right? But it will put it to sleep effectively after a period of time where no one has gone to the website. So on the free tier, your server's not running 24/7. It goes to sleep periodically, which is really cool. So it's super efficient. You can deploy this, have a link, and you'll notice, like, if you visit it for the first time in a day, it'll take like 15 seconds to load. But then after that, it's immediate. And that's because Heroku detected there was no traffic for a certain amount of time, and it put it to sleep. And the moment the first bit of traffic comes back, it quickly brings it back and then is online until it goes back to sleep. So that's the main restriction on the free tier. And it gives you a free domain name. Not a full domain name, but it has to be .herokuapp.com. But I didn't have to pay for this. sampleappfrank.herokuapp.com. So with this simple app, right, most RCOS projects tend to do this. They tend to plan everything out for a semester, work on it, and they go, okay, once we're done, and I say this from personal experience, once we're done, we will figure out how to deploy this, because that could take so long. And then you never deploy it, because you never get to a point where you say it's ready to deploy, or you make attempts to learn how to deploy it and it's too difficult. Maybe you're looking at different cloud providers, how they get the server and this and that and the domain name, all that. If you use Heroku, you don't need to pay anything. You just need to, for most cases, add one file. And you get a free domain name, which works for testing, works great. If you do have a domain name, you can very, very easily use your custom domain name. You are not stuck to use herokuapp.com by no means, but it gives you that for free. So now if you're an RCOS project, I recommend figuring out how to deploy as like one of the very, very first things you do after starting the code base for your project. Ideally, get it to deploy on Heroku, right? Set up automatic deployment, and then you have, for the whole semester, a URL you can easily go to test out at any time. Don't wait till the end, and if you do wait, you will probably never get to a point where you feel like it's ready to deploy. So I hear that all the time in RCOS presentations. Professor Turner goes, I have a question. So when are you going to deploy this? And then every project goes, well, it's looking really good. So we're thinking in the next 3 weeks, we'll deploy it. And then you say the same thing next semester, because there never is a point where it's going to be ready. So just to learn how to deploy it as soon as possible. Use Heroku if you can, because it's a great free service. They used to give free credits to students. They no longer do that, which is very frustrating, but they still have a generous free tier. So that's the main process of, I don't think I have any other. Yeah, that's the main process of getting a app to Heroku, creating a new Heroku app, connecting to the GitHub repository, adding any of the configuration it needs, and hitting deploy. It is really that simple. I promise you Heroku works with much more complicated applications than this 5-line Flask app. I've hosted all my projects and all the RCOS stuff on Heroku. and it's really phenomenal. So I encourage you, since I don't want to waste anyone's time, I'll just briefly touch on what future steps you should look into, and then you can explore that on your own. Not over break though, you gotta enjoy your break. So for future steps, Heroku also has a command line interface program, which just makes some things easier. You can do everything from the command line if you so choose. And as I showed you a little bit of those free Heroku add-ons, there are a dizzying array of them. Definitely, especially check out the free Postgres database. That is something that's super useful to many RCOS projects. I know a handful of projects I've been able to point to use it. I'm using it for a school project right now. And if you're so interested, there are many, many, many guides, tutorials, articles, videos, you name it, on Heroku, because it is a very popular platform. So feel free to check out some of these links I have here for further reading, or just Google it, because there's a lot of resources out there, and it really is meant to be as easy and accessible to get your web app deployed. So that concludes the main portion of this workshop. Check out Heroku, deploy something if you want, fork my app and deploy it just to get familiar with the process, and then do it with your own projects. Thank you for coming. Feel free to leave. Oh, actually, before people leave, let me take a screenshot of the attendance, and feel free to ask questions if you have any in the text channel, and I'll let you know when I have gotten a picture of you all so that you may go. Okay, we're good. So again, thank you for coming. You can either ask questions in the text channel or over voice, or hop out. I've got you all down. I'll make sure I enter in your attendance. Have a great rest of your Monday and a good last week of classes. Thank you.